Hello and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast. The place where we share creative and inspiring learning in our schools. Season 4, Episode 61. Hello and welcome back to the Education on Fire podcast with me, Mark Taylor. And today I'm delighted to welcome back Peter Cansell, our resident educational expert, who's been listening to the whole of our music in the arts season and got a few really interesting things to say as we discuss basically the sorts of things we've covered and some of the sort of themes that have come through. So Peter, thanks very much for coming back.
Hi Mark, nice to be here.
So why don't we start with what's your sort of initial insight or initial thoughts about any themes that have actually come through in any particular episodes which you thought really sort of hit the nail on the head in terms of how music and the arts are so important within primary education?
I think that the series itself has been, for me, it's been really useful and particularly inspiring at times. Some of the people that you've interviewed have been, you just want to pick them up and take them to every school. So from that point of view, it's been really good. The sorts of things that I would pick out would be Carol Aviard, who's done fantastic things at Harwell and elsewhere, and talking to Jane as well at Harwell. I thought that was really interesting and reminded me a lot of the school that I used to be the head teacher of, and also Claire Somerville at One Dance. I thought that was really interesting. So I've got a few thoughts about those, and I just thought it summed it up actually in the discussion you had with Craig McLeish, where he said he was passionate about children's experience. And I think that came through with so much of what was in this series.
I think that's the real art, I think, about education at the moment, with so much accountability and testing and all of that sort of stuff that we've talked about lots before, is that when you have the child at the heart of what you're trying to do and you can see around all of those things you must do as part of your job, but you can make it inclusive, you can make it inspiring, you can give the experience to the children that you think will really light them up, that's when you've really got the ability to really make a difference.
Yeah, and it's finding those people, and as was shown with your project, is making sure that those people have an impact, finding a way of getting to have an impact. I just going back to your project, which was the part of the journey that you talked about on this series. It just reflected so much. I was writing notes as I was listening to it, and as you were describing the difficulty in communication and transport issues for primaries and getting them all together to take part and participate, I just put a note saying "Welcome to my world." I had years and years of setting up projects in our local partnership, and that was in the days when partnerships were really cohesive, and we had a good cohesive partnership, and managed to set up drama projects and so on. But it is challenging. It's challenging. I learnt last week it's better to call them challenges rather than problems. But that silo mentality that you talked about is becoming more and more prevalent, and I predicted it. The whole move towards academies has pushed a silo mentality. It's inevitable. But when I was reflecting about what you were saying there and about who took part and who didn't take part, and I thought, yeah, but the ones who didn't take part, aren't they the ones that we really need to get involved?
I think that's absolutely true, and I think that's the thing that I find the hardest, is the fact that on this podcast, the people listening are the people already inspiring children, and they're that teacher and that educator that the children will remember for their life. That one person that really got me, that really understood what was going on. But how do you get to the people that are really struggling and don't quite know how the world works in that way, or how they can change the sorts of things they can offer their children? And that's kind of a problem or a challenge, as you said, is a better way of putting it, of actually how to get this message out there.
Yeah, I think we need all of our listeners to grab the teacher in their staff room who doesn't inspire, who doesn't listen to these things, and force them to sit down and listen.
Well, I mean, that's certainly something I would recommend. If you're listening out there, just if you could be our advocate, just mention it to as many people as you can. Just say, just pick an episode and see what they think. And there are so many ways you can listen. You can either listen on the Education on Fire website, or if you've got an iPhone or iPad, you can use the podcast app, or you can listen through iTunes. If you have an Android phone, you can listen through Stitcher and various other players. And so there are lots of ways of doing it, and it doesn't have to be, I need to find more time for this. Lots of people listen to podcasts these days when you're taking the dog for a walk, when you're in the gym, when you're on your commute. There's lots of ways of doing it, and I think especially sort of starting your day with something which is firing you up is going to be really helpful for firing the children up as well. So yeah, if you could recommend it to anybody that in your school, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. So if we look at some of the things that the podcast that came out, I was really inspired, I think, by the interview with Craig McLeish for Young Voices. I just thought, what a great ambassador for music he is, with all the things that he's done. I sympathised enormously with the publishing and copyright problems, because I've been through that, having done lots of performance stuff in my own school. It's a struggle, and that baffles me. It really baffles me, and always has. I remember having long arguments with people in theatres saying, when I wanted to take a group of children to go backstage at a theatre for a tour, and they would say, oh, well, it's very difficult, health and safety, and it's awful, and we can't do this and we can't do that. And I said, look, you really just have to look at this in terms of marketing. This is your future audience. You really need to grab these children, enthuse them, get them into the magic of the theatre, get them into the magic of music in this case, and they will be there. You've made all your money for the future. But they didn't seem to grasp that very quickly. I couldn't quite grasp it myself.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And as you said, it's when I went to the Young Voices, because Katie was performing in one of those concerts, and what was amazing was the fact that they were singing songs from Ed Sheeran and Rag and Bone Man and that kind of thing, and it's all they were talking about. It's, oh yeah, we're singing this song, we're singing that song. I've heard it on the radio, and those are the people. They then think, oh great, they're my people. They're the people I want to be listening to. I've had a chance to sing with it, and like you say, they are the audience, and they're also the audience and a paying audience for the next generation. And anything you can do to grab that, I think, is just absolutely so important.
Yeah. It's an investment for them, and if there are any publishers listening, just take note. That's what I say.
I have to say, one of the things I found interesting through this was, as you said, there are so many really inspiring people, but also I realised that it's not actually just about money. I mean, we do need more funding in schools, and with my conversation about people working with hubs and all of that kind of thing, there is funding out there. You have to be quite creative in partnerships and all that kind of thing. But it seemed to me the dividing line is actually, do we want our school to be a musical school, or are we not that focused on it? We'd rather be more focused on the maths and the English side of everything. And it seems to be more of an attitude, actually, rather than just a funding problem.
I think you're right, and it is about people having the drive and the ambition and the passion to get things moving. But of course, there are competing things. You talked about maths and English. In my own school, it was really interesting listening to Jane Clancy at Hartwell, and how similar that was to the setup that I had in my own school. It's interesting, isn't it, that her school's name is very similar to my school's name. It just has an extra T in it. I also engaged a music specialist. I realised that my teachers, I just looked around the school and just was disappointed with how we were delivering music, and I thought we had to do something about it, and got a music specialist, a good friend of mine called Paul Harrington, who was brilliant. He was actually a peripatetic before that. He'd got fed up with being a peripatetic and going to schools where they didn't appreciate him. And I said, well, come and work for me. And he worked one day a week, did every class in the school except the class that was getting first access, who were learning violin, and we brought it in for 3 terms, all 3 terms in the year for them. But it's very similar setup to what Jane was describing. But I also had a similar thing. I happened to have a teacher on my staff who was a language specialist. She'd retrained from being a modern languages specialist, secondary modern language specialist, retrained as a primary teacher. And so we made use of her skills. And so we had languages across the school. But that was purely, good fortune or good management on my side of having somebody with those skills. But, you then have the competing a curriculum for PE, and wanted to make sure that PE is happening, want to make sure that dance is happening, because of course it comes in as a separate curriculum thing to music. It comes in as part of the PE curriculum, making sure that drama is happening, and where you squeeze that in. It's trying to make sure that all those things that are really important, and we think are really important, as well as the maths and English and science and the IT that needs to go on. It's the competition for places, and people tend to, I think, a lot of schools tend to defer to the English, maths and science curriculum. They know they've got to do that, and they know they're being measured on that. They won't be measured on their creativity. I will never forget having an Ofsted inspector who told me that I would really like my daughter to come to this school because you do so many creative things and it's so great, and the children are so happy and they enjoy what's going on. But when I look at your results, I couldn't possibly send her here. And I thought, how sad. I just thought, well, if that really is the attitude, and how do we manage to make our schools the places we want our children to be happy in?
Absolutely, and what you need is the head teacher to be somebody that understands the political side of things and the things that need to happen, but they also understand the child and they understand the bigger picture, and try and put the two together. And I think they may be a slightly dwindling band of people that are prepared to do that, because like you said, everybody's reputations, everyone's career progression and all that is based on your results, and that's a never-ending cycle at the moment anyway, which is, I hope, is something that we change. And one thing I remember from having spoken to Jane Clancy was the fact that she was very purposeful about it, not just in terms of we'll get someone in, but things even like we're going to have a music assembly once a term, so therefore let's put the music assembly in the diary now at the beginning of term or at the beginning of the year, so that it's in there already, because unless you're being that purposeful about it, it doesn't happen, because something else will always crop up, and so you have to make it that important.
Oh yeah, and putting those concerts in. We used to have 3 concerts a year as well as our productions, and teachers used to pitch in and help. Even if it's just putting the chairs out after school, that sort of commitment is an extra commitment for some teachers, and you just need to build a community that's going to do that, and it wants it to happen because it's about the school. And I have to say that I had some teachers who were, keener on doing those sorts of things than others.
And I guess that is something which takes time, isn't it? I guess new heads that come into schools, or new management as they come in, it's that kind of, even if you want to change the community, if you want to change the ethos of the school and the general feeling of it, that takes a bit of time, because you have to kind of get those other teachers on board, and then you'll have a little bit of new teachers coming in as time goes on as well, and people leaving, and so there must be a sort of a time lag even between your sort of dream of what you'd like to create and actually the reality, and I think the communication and the authentic conversations between parents and governors and teachers and governors and parents is a trio, really. It's really important, because the one thing I dislike, which I hear quite a lot, is that kind of, isn't this brilliant? We're doing this, we're doing that. Everyone's really enthused, which is great if they are, but it needs to be a real honest mix. And it's that kind of, but actually also knowing we understand that actually this part of the curriculum or this we'd like to do, but we're not in a position to do it now, but we do know about it and we are working forward. And I think then, certainly as a parent, and also as a teacher that goes into schools, I think I don't necessarily want to be in the school which has got everything completely sorted, as fantastic as that would be. But if I'm in an environment which is looking forward, which is growing, which has a plan, which knows what it's about, and building a community to support that, that's a really exciting place to work, no matter where they are on their journey of getting from A to B.
People have different approaches. I think, I always used to claim that my best feature was my retrospective planning. When I was in the classroom, I could plan really good lessons after I taught them. But it's about, it's fundamentally, it's about knowing, it's about having that ambition. It's about knowing that you want that sort of world. It's knowing what sort of world you want, isn't it? And believing and taking everybody on that journey with you. And I think that's really what's important. And I just think we need to work even harder. Those of us that care about education in its biggest connotation, we just need to work harder to make sure that more and more people understand this and feel this. I was at a great event last week. I was at I say it's a great event since I helped to organise it. I shouldn't say that, but it was a head teachers conference with about 200 people there altogether. But we had a lovely chap called Jim Robeson, and I don't know if you've heard of Jim. He's originally an American. He now teaches in Portsmouth.
Right.
And a fantastic character, absolutely amazing, who just enthused the audience on end of a Friday morning, which was the end of the conference, when people were wanting to get their lunch and go home. He just kept them absolutely riveted for over an hour, just with his charismatic character and the way in which he engaged them and the messages he was giving. And it was all about engaging with children and making sure that they got the best from their education experience. And that's what we all need to do, I think.
And I think that's right. And I think that's what I find interesting as well, because the arts and music are very much part of that, certainly from my point of view as well, sort of being a musician. I mean, I think there are things that come through the arts which can support and help children express themselves in a way that other subjects aren't. Yeah. But I think also it's understanding that it doesn't matter what the subject is, even within English and maths, which are incredibly important. It's not, we talk about the focus of those win-on schools. It's not that I don't believe that they're incredibly important. It's just that it shouldn't be the sole focus. But even within those subjects as well, the way you get the kids to understand things and do it, it's a little bit like, we're learning about money. I'm going to sit in the classroom and just write all the things down. Or actually, could you go to the shops and I'll give you a shopping list. Here's the amount of money you've got. Can you make sure you've got enough money and bring me back the change? That kind of being involved in those sorts of things changes their whole understanding and makes it relevant to the world that they're living in. And I think that's why it's not just about the individual subjects. It's actually, like you say, about the overall ethos. And actually, I think once you start to get people enthused about what's possible and therefore getting that across to the children, then that's when things really start to change.
Yeah, I agree totally, Mark. I wasn't trying to disrespect those subjects. Having been an English teacher for a long time, I would certainly think it's important, but it's perhaps it's about the measurement of those things and the importance attached to the measurement of those subjects, which is where I have a problem.
And the other really interesting thing I found from doing this whole series is the fact that another common feature, which is a really important one, is that the things that people are really enthusiastic about and also seem to really strive to want to be involved in are the ones that are actually where you take part in things. The specialist music teachers that I spoke to, it was all very much about, get off your chair, move around, lots of call and response, lots of doing things together, and, you think about things like Young Voices, yes, you spend a lot of time in school learning the songs, but it's also about the fact you then get to go out and perform those. You get to a big arena and have that experience.
Oh,
but then,
yeah.
All of those things, it's about actually taking part in something. And I think there is something very much about that. And even, the interview I did about Sinfonia, it's that kind of, that's about actually playing music, but in a modern way with the fact you've got technology rather than paper music, but it's still about actually taking part in something.
Yeah, Yeah, and I thought that was good. The Apollo music thing, where they actually bring it to the children.
Yes,
and I thought there are some really good initiatives out there. I think that we have the potential to do it. It's just if only somebody had some joined up thinking.
Yes.
Or is that too much to wish for?
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of where we are at the moment, isn't it? It's the fact that if we had a government that said, look at all these opportunities, we're going to make music in the arts and all of the other subjects an absolute priority, here's the funding for it, these things would flourish because they're already there to be had. It's the fact that because that's not the focus at the moment, you have to have the creativity of people involved in education to see that bigger picture and understand that, and therefore almost go out on a limb, because I think we've mentioned this before, but the one thing we do know is that if you have a thriving school with great physical education, great arts, great music, great IT, all of that kind of stuff, then you often have an outstanding school, because the whole way the school works and the way it gets put together and the teachers that are involved, you can tick every box you need to tick at that point, but you have to get from A to B, and actually convincing people that you will achieve what you're going to achieve in this slightly more global way is a really hard sell, when everything's about what results do we get, this term, this year, who's accountable at what point, and it's a really tricky thing to do.
Yeah, I've been talking a lot recently to people about the way in which schools as institutions find it very difficult to cope with individuals who don't quite fit the mold, that sort of thing can be accommodated much more by people who are open to change, open to looking at things in a different way within the school. But it's a challenge for schools, and I understand that. But it's a challenge which can be overcome, and it's about people having passion for education. I think I worry that perhaps over the last 15, 20 years, whatever it is, since the national curriculum came in, that we've slowly de-skilled teachers, stopped teachers over the years, particularly in recent couple of years, thinking about education in its biggest sense, and there are lots of aspects of education that teachers who are being trained at the moment don't get the chance to learn about. They don't get a chance to learn about child development and child psychology. They don't get a chance to learn about the sociology of education because there just isn't time. But they do get a chance to learn to teach, to manage a class, and to be effective in front of the class. But what's squeezed out because of the way things are structured is that reflection time. And any teacher will tell you that once you get into the classroom, the time for reflection and learning just isn't there because you're so full on with your class of children.
Yes, and I think from a music and the arts point of view, I think the thing that concerns me a lot is the fact that, where does that cycle end? Because having less music going on in schools means you have less children leaving school with an understanding of music and also participating in music or even going to watch anything related to music. And therefore, as a professional musician myself, that basically trickles down to less people going to see shows, which means there are less companies able to put on shows, which means that there's less work within the arts and less creative people having the support to do really interesting things. And that's a generational thing. We're looking into the future and thinking, well, who's actually going to go and watch these concerts? And then also, what's also has come apparent from chatting to people is the fact that people then go outside of school to be able to get these things, So I'm not able to have music in my school, so therefore I'll find a private tutor where I can learn to play piano, for example, and I'll find an external ensemble that I can go and play in, and that's fantastic. But it does mean that one, you need to have the time and you need to have the resources to do it independently. And then we're suddenly back into that same thing. But what about the child who needs the support at school with the education which he's been given within his school, where he gets that just chance to experience a lot of things where he can just think, but that's the thing that I really like. And even if he needs to find an extension of that outside of school in some way or another, and there are great things out there, but without having that initial experience, if you're not given it or given the opportunity of that by parents or people that are able to do that, then surely we're just, we're really, I don't know, it's almost like a neglect really for those people that aren't going to get the chance to do that.
And it can be quite surprising. One of my sons really didn't take to anything sporting at all. He's not interested in sport in any way, shape or form. But it just so happened that the secondary school that he went to was a sports college. But luckily, they were an open-minded, broad-thinking sports college who included a strong element of dance within their PE curriculum, and it was important. Dance was considered as an equal subject with all the other PE subjects, and that was the one subject in PE that he really liked. He fell in love with dance. He went to do youth dance stuff at the weekends. He then ended up doing a foundation course in dance and a degree. And, his degree was in dance because he didn't like sport. And it's, those sorts of predictions are very difficult to make when you are designing the way that your school runs. You can't imagine that's going to happen. But we should be taking account of that, exactly as you say, taking account of what could happen and the potential that we have in children.
And so I really hope that during this season, what we've been able to cover, and we have a little discussion off air before we started, and this is very much my passion. Music it's very much my passion.
We noticed, Mark. We noticed this season was 20 episodes long.
Yes, exactly. And I think we will. Our coming seasons will be shorter and more focused, which I think will give you much more a diverse content and much more concise. But as I said, it's sort of my passion project, which I hope you've enjoyed going all the way through. But what I hope it has done is it's given you a really sort of insight into what's possible, where you can go to get resources. We had the conversations with GigaJam about, guitar and bass and keyboard and drum lessons, online, and actually having that aspect of things, as well as the very traditional kind of let's find out how we can make music from no funding and no ideas, with people that have got all those things there that you can actually just pull together with just a little bit of understanding, and I think my conversation with Carol Aviard about how you can put all these things together was a really interesting one for me, because it's kind of what I always think and always believe, but actually interesting talking about it and trying to articulate it in such a way that you can do, in the fact that there are, there's free singing resources out there, the fact that you have the opportunity to, if you need some structure, you've got the great resources from Out of the Ark, and you've also got Chirango and Music Express and all those sorts of things which really can take you by the hand, and also, especially as a music coordinator, when your time is probably quite stretched, being able to support the other members of your staff so that they can really deliver music in a really insightful way, and with the support that they need if they haven't had that more formal training of that sort of thing, but you can still give your students something which is really something they can take away in a positive manner.
Yeah, and the thing that impressed me particularly about your discussion with Carol was the way in which both of your enthusiasms for teaching music and for children shone through. I thought that was wonderful. It was lovely to hear that. I think I just sort of as an overall reflection about education, arts and education, I was thinking back to, I don't know if you remember the publication All Our Futures, which was done by, there was Lenny Henry was involved, and various other people. I can't remember who. David Putnam, I think, was the chair of it, of a government committee that was set up, and they produced a publication called All Our Futures. And it was about the arts in education and how we go forward from there. And there have been many good things that have come out of that, and people that have done good things since then. But actually, when I look back at that, I just wonder if we've really progressed, or if we've made progress and then gone back again. And there's an RSA, Royal Society of Arts, investigation at the moment called Learning About Culture, which is a 2.5-year investigation into the role that culture plays in learning. And I just wonder if that will come out with similar conclusions to the All Our Futures one, and whether we just need to start again. We need those people like Carol, people like you and Craig and all those people that you've talked to with enthusiasm and passion for pushing the music particularly, but the arts in general, back into our schools.
I mean, I really hope so. And I think anything that this podcast does to kind of support people who are already doing it, just to give them a boost with extra resources, and also just to know that other people are doing it as well. And those people that have just in the back of their mind was wanting to do it but not quite sure how to go about it, even if it's things just like my conversation with You Can Play, about the funding which is available, just ways of going about that. How do you make it part of a cross-curricular project where you can get funding for a history project maybe, and you can tie the music of the era into it, that sort of thing. Just thinking outside the box, which can really just help just transform the way you can do things in a way you may not have thought about before.
Yeah, I think that's quite an instructive thing for new head teachers particularly. I remember when I started that the one thing, I mean, you got lots of instruction about lots of stuff, but the one thing they never tell you is where to get the money from. And you really have to look for it. But it's there. It is there if you want to go out and find it. And I remember an inspiring person from a head teacher that I went to listen to from, I think it might have been Sheffield, who has done all sorts of things. He'd gone into partnership with his a local major company, and they funded a great many things happening in school. And what he was able to do eventually was offer that company training for their staff. They were able to come and do things in school, and do projects and things with children, which develop them as people. And that's a two-way thing. And it's about imaginative thinking. And he was making money for the school. He was a great entrepreneur. I think his school was better off than than the company he was working with, I think.
That's often the case, exactly. And and my conversation with Eric from Active Music Digital, I mean, he was really keen to get people to listen. There is a 10-day free trial of the 600 videos and 168 lesson plans and all of that kind of thing. Yeah. But because he's really keen to support people, the offer still stands. That was on that podcast about if you sign up and email me your name and the name of the school, you get an extra 6 months, so you get 18 months for the price of for 12. But because anybody in the school can use it, you can literally have all of those resources. I think even the top rate was something like £149 or something like that for the whole year. Don't quote me on that without going to check again, but it was around that figure. And that's an awful lot of resources. That's sort of 15 years worth of his wife's training and experience, all brought down just to a really easy, workable something that you can follow. And I just think it's like I say, it's working with people in those sorts of partnerships, which just gives you extra things which you haven't got time to source on your own, but hopefully things like this podcast and people within the field of trying to get these sorts of ideas out and about can really support you with. Yeah.
And I think that I was talking last week to someone from our county music service who brought a group of young musicians, and he was saying that they're changing the way they're operating. They're going to be operating as a trades service, and I guess that's probably true for a lot of music services across the country now. I feel very, and have always said how lucky we have been, and know that in Northants, I think you've been the same, to have hung on to a music service who've been able to deliver the peripatetic teaching and the other things that go on, the music schools and so on that go on, and have produced so many good things for children and have given them opportunities. We have always had young musicians coming to our conference to perform, and we had the Dixieland Jazz Band last week, and they were amazing youngsters of 15, 16, I guess, who, one who was playing a sousaphone, and all playing brass instruments plus a drum kit, I suppose, but they were just so enthusiastic. But it just struck me as such young people passionate about music and enjoying making music. And I thought how important that is, and what an opportunity for them, and they clearly, I'm not quite sure on the mentality of someone that picks up a sousaphone and thinks that's what I'm going to play, but
absolutely,
it was wonderful.
Like we said, it's experience and exposure, and there's something for everybody, and that's the key. Yeah. And what's just reminded me of that is one of the things that came out of my conversations with the schools as I was setting up our project here in Northants was the interesting thing that a lot of the teachers said what the children really like within their primary school is seeing the children who are a little bit older than them doing something already. So while it is possible for professional musicians, for example, to come into schools and do master classes and do the sorts of resources that they've got on offer, actually what they found was really, really interesting is actually when it's the secondary school pupils bringing their wind band or their Dixieland band or whatever it happened to be, because they're children that they know because they remember them from their school when they were younger, or it's just that because of the relationship in ages and the fact they're still students and all that sort of thing, you have that progression, and that was the same with me. When I was learning, it was that kind of, I can understand what you're doing even though I'm not quite there yet, but I'd like to do it, and I can see where it's going and what is available and what could happen, and that's an experience I would like to do. And so it's having all that joined up experience and environment, really, which is a really key factor, I think, in joining the dots for all of these things.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be children from the secondary school. You can get great things. So I think Carol mentioned, she often features Jane rather often features children who've just are doing music exams or whatever in assemblies and so on, and we used to too, and we always encourage children to take part in productions, which included music as well. And some of them, I've had phenomenal children that just could easily take part in professional productions at year 5, year 6, and some even younger. So I think that you can look to your own resources in a primary school and see fantastic talent, which will inspire others if you allow it to flourish.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. So just to round up, is there anything else that you took away from the season that would be worth sort of sharing as we wrap up this sort of final episode of season 4, and any sort of takeaways you'd like to leave with everybody listening?
I think there's a rather depressing thought that struck me when I was listening, particularly when I was listening to Carol and you talking about the way in which specialist teachers are being used, and the way in which class teachers don't feel confident to teach their own music, and how we're not training them. And it just struck me that that's one of the downsides that we've got, is that something really must be done to re-skill teachers to be able to teach the full curriculum. I have a lot to do with sport and PE as well, and I see that particularly in PE, where teachers have been de-skilled. They've had the whole of PE taken out of their hands and put into the hands of coaches. Well, now any PE specialist would throw their hands up in horror at that and say that shouldn't be happening, but it's what has happened. And we have to recognise that, and recognise that that's the case with the arts as well, not just music, but the arts in general. People are a bit scared, and I think Carol mentioned that people are a bit scared to take the chance on doing things, and so we need to give them back that confidence to go out there and enjoy teaching and enjoy the things their children can do and celebrate that. And I think music's a great way to do that, a great way to start it. And some of the things that were mentioned in the way in which you talked about what you can do to start teaching music and easy rhythm games and so on, I think people, can benefit from that, and we should spread the word even more widely in order to get those things off the ground. I think, Mark, everybody should be applauding the fact that you are carrying the flag along with other people, but you're doing it through this means, and I think that it's important that it's out there and being waved.
Thank you very much, and I have to say I'm really enjoying the journey. You know, it's fantastic chatting to so many people who are so inspired about it, and like you say, while sometimes it feels a little bit depressing that it could be a different way, and like you said, I think the whole skills of teachers not necessarily having the opportunity to learn these things when they're being trained now is a little bit of a depressing thing. But hopefully within this whole episode, this whole season, there are a few things in there which can that just mean that if you haven't got that experience but also confidence to do it, that there's a few things there that you can pick up either with some of the resources that we've recommended, or even silly things like when I was chatting to Carol, one of the things I did as a composition in one of my schools was just to create a composition based on a walk through a forest, or and actually just create a clock and have a time of the clock hand going round, and within that the kids did a little diagram of what sounds they wanted at different times and how it was going to be put together, and it was very simple, very straightforward. They had the chance to go out of school and find some of the sounds they wanted. You know, they got to experiment. I talked to Sue Nichols about that, about having the opportunity just to, how do you know what sounds to create in a composition if you've never had the chance just to experiment with what that sounds like, you know, and even things like that. So don't think about teaching music as in I need to learn all the crotchets, quavers and semiquavers and impart it onto my pupils. No, just get them to enjoy sounds, just bring things in, shake them, scrape them, do whatever, and just use it in a very organic way, you know, and then that's the starting point, and the more formal stuff can flow from that through the sorts of people that I've spoken to on this season, but also from some of those great established organisations now that have got all the resources there ready for you to tap into.
I think what you were talking about with Carol about, and you were talking about the creating sound journeys and so on. I thought that was really interesting. It took me back decades to my training as a teacher, and one of the things that we learnt in music was about creating soundscapes of using all sorts of instruments, but also different found objects as well in small groups, and just being told, right, now you create a story with those sounds. There's no words, it's just those sounds, and create a soundscape. And so we had to do this. And that was, you know, within the confines of music. It was being described as music. It wasn't what I'd thought of as music in those terms, but it was actually counted as part of it. And it opened my mind. And I've held that in my armoury and have been able to use that with groups of children here and there where, you know, I'm supposed to be teaching music to them on the curriculum, and I can do that. I felt comfortable about doing that. And those sorts of things, and rhythm games and so on, which many teachers use anyway, you know, are part of the music curriculum and at the start of the music curriculum, perhaps. And perhaps, you know, people wouldn't recognise it as formal music, but, you know, perhaps it needs a redefinition of what we call music, and allow people to include those things within it.
I think that's right, and just to finish off, it reminds me, I've just been reading the Christian Schiller book that we were discussing and saw at our last NAPE meeting, and it talks about this in terms of what creativity is and how you use it, and music's a very clear example of this. That kind of stage one is kind of experimentation. You know, what does this sound like? If I do this to this, it results in this, and you need that experimentation side to be able to understand what it is that you're even trying to understand, you know, and then the next stage is that kind of becoming competent at being able to learn whatever it is that you're doing. So I now know that if I scrape something with some if I scrape something, then it's going to make a scrapey sound, or if it's metal, it's going to sound like this, and if it's wood, it's going to sound like this. And you sort of get au fait about how you learn to move it or play it or produce whatever you want to do. And once you've got to that stage, then you can be really creative because you have an understanding of what you're able to do and what the results can be, and then your imagination can then produce it in a way that's very personal to you. And I thought, actually, from a musical point of view, I can see that. You know, I now know what a shaker looks like and sounds like. I know how to make a sound, and now I can express myself through that, through some kind of ability that I've learned. But it doesn't necessarily have to be music. That, I think that as a starting point for any curriculum or any part of the subjects within the curriculum is a really important one. It's a bit like language, you know, experimenting with language. Oh, okay. And now I become a bit more competent about what it is. and now I can write something that really comes from my heart that I can express. And I think that creativity is probably something which, just like we said before, you need time for that, and you need the chance to experiment, and then you can use that competency to really express yourself.
Yeah, and I presume that we can look forward to hearing you playing the spoons in a future episode, Mark.
Absolutely, it's going to become a standard part of every episode. Fantastic. Peter, thanks so much for chatting. It's always a delight and really insightful into what we're doing. And yes, I'll speak to you on season 5, and just so you know, the episode after this will be me chatting about how we're going to develop the podcast and how we might slightly restructure the seasons, and that to give you, the listener, the best input and the best information that we can in a structured format. So if you've got anything you'd like to say to us about season 4 Music in the Arts, please get in touch. The best way is just drop me an email. It's just mark@educationonfire.com, and let me know your thoughts and what's been good and what you think we can improve, and anything we can do to help, and we'll take all that on board and as we move on and develop the podcast for the future. So thanks very much, Peter.
Thanks, Mark. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Education on Fire podcast. For more information of each episode and to get in touch, go to educationonfire.com. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.